If you've been wanting to take your live stream mix to the next level and mix it on a DAW instead of just making a mix bus and sending that to the live stream, but you're not really sure how to do it or you think it's too complicated, this video is just for you. I'm gonna share with you some stuff because mixing in a DAW is kind of similar to mixing on a live sound console, but it's also very different. Dealing with live inputs, the console is made for that. The DAW is not made for that. It's made to record and then mix recorded audio files. So if you want to use the DAW as a sound mixer, there are some things that you need to take into consideration. If you don't know how to use Reaper, don't worry. I'm gonna show you exactly every step you need to do. In fact, I learned Reaper just to make a better live stream for my church. Prior to that, I used Reaper a little bit just for multi-track recording and playback, but I didn't really do anything else. And the reason I chose Reaper is because first of all, it can do some things that other DAWs just simply cannot do at all. Secondly, it can be very easily remote controlled. So I can control Reaper from my phone or tablet or other computer or any device. And most importantly, it can send audio through the network natively. Just connect your computer to a network and I can send my mix from Reaper, from this computer, directly to OBS on the other computer that is streaming. Oh, and I almost forgot to tell you why I need all that flexibility. The shape of the church is very difficult. It's like two halls like that and the stage is in the corner. The mixer is behind the curtain. And so naturally the computer that is mixing the live stream should be next to the mixer because you can't run USB cables very long distances. Behind that curtain is like really small. It's that small. You can't keep a person there. To get behind the curtain, you'll have to go on stage and then open the curtain and go behind it. It's really distracting. So during the service, there's no way anyone will actually mix on the laptop. So what I did is just one click. You just turn on the laptop at the beginning before the service and Reaper opens on its own and the template loads on its own and everything is ready to go. It's sending audio to OBS. It's great. First thing we need to do is go to the mixer and open the in-out routing menu and then go to the USB send. This is the page where I decide what I want to send from the mixer to the card or to Reaper. By default, all the channels will go with an analog tap to your computer. Analog just means that whatever you plug into your XLR input will go as it is straight out of the USB, regardless if you have muted the channel or not. But we don't really want that. I want to, whenever I mute a channel on the mixer, it also gets muted in Reaper. I'll right click on that intersection and make it analog plus mute. So now if channel 1 is muted, it will not go to Reaper anymore. And instead of right clicking on all of them, I'll go down to the default signal tab, select analog plus mute, and now I can just click on them and it changes it to analog plus mute. So I'm not sending any processing from the mixer. I'm still sending the pure original signal, but with the mute. Whenever I mute something on the mixer, it also stops going to Reaper. And later on, I'll show you where I will need input plus mute, and I'll tell you what's the difference between analog and input. After that, I'm gonna get my USB cable, USB type B to type A, plug that one into my computer and plug that one into the mixer. And that's my connection from the mixer to the computer. Let's download Reaper. Go to the downloads page, find your operating system, download it, install Reaper, open Reaper, and go to the top right corner and click here to open the preferences. And the audio system will be ASIO and the audio driver will be your mixer driver. Now I'm using the M32C because that's what I have at home, but with the MR18, you'll have the MR18 ASIO driver. You'll select that. If you don't have it, go to the Midas website, search for Midas consoles and go to the downloads page and then search for the MR18 driver. And you're gonna find it right here, MR18 USB audio driver, and download the latest version. After you select the audio driver, you're gonna make sure that inputs are enabled and select the first input you have and select the last input if they are not already selected. Same for the outputs, first output, last output. Then you're gonna go to the ASIO configuration, click here, go over to the buffer settings. You'll find the input latency and output latency in samples and in milliseconds. So if I select a high buffer like 1024, you'll see I have 1096 samples of latency on the input, which is 22.83 milliseconds, and 1224 samples on the output, which is 25.5 milliseconds. And the round trip latency is both combined. So the time that it takes the audio to get into the computer and back out of the computer is 48.3 milliseconds. Keep your buffer high. There's no point in using a lower buffer because the video takes a lot of time to process anyway. Regardless how much your latency is, if you're using 1024 samples or 2048 samples, it's like 40 or 80 milliseconds of latency. But the the video takes about 200. So even with all the latency you get from using a high buffer size, you're still gonna add delay on top of that to sync it with the video. Reaper is really lightweight. Doesn't matter what your computer is, just keep the buffer high. Last thing I wanna talk about here is the request block size. If this is on, you type in the buffer right here, let's say 1024, and hit OK. You can see up here, the buffer is 1024 samples. If I go back in here and back into the ASIO configuration, this box in Reaper changed the buffer size in the audio driver. I personally don't want that, so I'll uncheck request block size and set the buffer in the driver itself. This is the edit window. This is the mixer window. If you double click in any empty spot, you will create a new track either in the edit window or in the mixer window. If you want to name that track, you can click in that empty spot right here, double click and name it, or you can click in the mixer window above the number of the track, double click and name it. And you can hit the tab button to go to the next track and tab again, or you can hit shift tab to go to the previous track. And that way you can name them quickly. And to change the color of a track, you're gonna right click on it, go to track color, then set tracks to custom color and choose your favorite color and hit OK. Now what I like to do is to set them to the same color they are in the mixer. I also like to create spacers between my tracks. Right click, then I'll add a visual spacer. I can insert the spacer before the track that I selected, after the track I selected, or before and after. And it will create one spacer before the track and one spacer after. I can click and drag on that spacer to move it around. And you can also remove that spacer by right clicking on it and hit remove spacer. Now one thing that confused me when I started using Reaper, because it's very different from a console or from Pro Tools. In Pro Tools, if you want to process a bunch of tracks together, send them to a certain bus that is predefined in Pro Tools, and then assign that bus to be the input of an aux track. But in Reaper, there are no track types. So this track can be either a mono track or a stereo track or a surround, or it can be a video track, it can be MIDI, comments, or a picture. It really can be anything. Down here is for the sends, software send or a hardware send. So I can send it to a physical output or I can send it to another track. Click on here and I'll create a new send and I can send it to a track. I'll send it to the track called Daniel. That track number 7 is going to the track called Daniel. If I arm the track and I speak into it, here you go, you can see the signal going into that track. I'll remove that by pressing Alt and clicking on it, or you can click on the send and hit delete. An easier way to do it, I can grab that square that is colored, that is for the routing. If I click on it, I can remove a channel from the master mix. If I turn this off, now it's not going to the master anymore. Turn it on, goes back to the master. So if I grab the routing button of a certain channel and throw it on another channel, now I'm sending that channel to that one. Let's say all these are microphones and I want to process them on their own, but I also want to process them as a group. So instead of sending each one of them to that same track, I can select them and grab them and go to whatever track I will consider as my bus and go to the left bottom corner. You'll see this little folder icon. If I release my mouse, these tracks are under that one. So that is a bus for all of these tracks. And you can see the indentation. They are slightly higher in here and they are slightly to the side in here. So this is how you can know that these tracks are inside that group. And if I arm one track, you'll see this signal is going through here. And if I want to arm multiple tracks together, I can click and hold and swipe like this and arm all of them, or click and hold and swipe and disarm all of them. Or I can click and select a bunch and click arm on one and it will arm all of them, and disarm one and it will disarm all of them, as long as they're selected. If I remove the selection, it's just that one. Same thing, faders. If I select a bunch of tracks and move one fader, it moves all the faders. If I deselect them, it just moves that fader. And if you want to remove them from the group, you can grab that track and pull it to the outside. And now it's not in that group anymore. It's going straight to the master. And so now we want to record a multi-track in order to have some material to work with in order to prepare a mix. Even if there's someone mixing during the live stream, we still need to get it to a good enough spot, and then that person will just write faders or do small moves. We still need to assign the inputs of the tracks. So we can either do it from here, click on input and select if it's a mono input, I'll assign it to 1. For example, if it's a stereo input, I can assign it from here, input stereo, and select 3, 4, and so on and so forth. Or I can open the routing matrix Alt R to open the routing matrix. And from here, I can assign the channels that are up here to the inputs that are on the left right here. These are the mono inputs. And if I go down, you can see the stereo inputs. So because you assigned the drums to be 3-4, it's on number 3 and it's taking 3-4 because this is a stereo input. So I can continue like that. I can do bass on input 5, 6, 7. And lastly, I have the aux channel. It's a stereo input. So I'm gonna go down 17, 18, click on it. If I go back here, you can see it's 17, 18 for the aux and all the channels are assigned to inputs. Great. Don't forget, in order to hear the sound from the track, you need to have it armed. The record button should be on. File up here and hit save project and decide where you're gonna save it. And then you're gonna hit create subdirectory for project and copy all media into project directory. Check these two and then call it a name and hit save. Now we can start recording. So I'm gonna arm all the tracks. Click on the record button and here you go, I'm recording. And when I'm done recording, I can hit the space bar, click Ctrl S to save. And now I have project that I can take home with me and mix it. I'm personally using all stock Reaper plugins. I'm not using any external third-party plugins except for the reverb. Also something to keep in mind, because now everything is based on subscriptions. You don't own anything anymore. You might have trouble with licensing the plugins. That's why I'm just using Reaper plugins or just free plugins that don't require a license. Reaper plugins are really good. Don't be fooled by the interface that it looks ugly. Click in an empty spot up here to add a plugin. Click on all plugins and search for EQ. It looks like this. And by the way, it's not a fixed number of bands. You can add bands to it and you can remove bands. You can just have a 1-band EQ or 2-band EQ or a 10-band EQ. That's really impressive. I didn't realize that when I first started using it. You can have as many bands as you want. It even shows you the phase if you want to see what's shifting in the phase. From here, you can change the type of the band. This is a low shelf. This is a high shelf. This is just a normal EQ. This is a low pass filter. Then you have a band pass, which only lets frequencies inside that band go through. So nothing below it, nothing above. Then you can add a compressor. I'll do recomp. Pre-compression, don't use that because it adds latency. This section right here is really important. Main inputs means that the compressor is looking at the signal coming into that channel in order to compress. If you change to auxiliary inputs, this is sidechaining. In order to do the sidechain, I will grab the routing button of the track and drag it into the compressor while having auxiliary input selected. Why am I explaining this? Because we'll use it later for something really important. If I turn up the high pass, it will disregard all the bass in my voice. So no matter how close I am and doing into the microphone, it's not compressing at all. If I lower the filter, now all the low end is compressing. If I turn down the low pass, there's a lot of high frequencies. It will not take it into consideration. If you have an electronic drum kit and you don't have separate channels, kick and snare and toms and everything comes through a stereo output, for example, you can raise the high pass so that the kick drum does not trigger the compressor, but everything else triggers the compressor. You can also use a de-esser. I'll click de-esser. You can change the type to high pass or band. High pass basically compresses everything above a certain frequency. The target type is set to high pass and I have the frequency at 5500 Hertz. From that frequency and up, everything will get compressed according to the threshold. So if I lower the threshold, you can see it's triggering the de-esser. If I select band pass, then it's only a band. It's not everything above. It's everything around that frequency. And be very careful if you have a stereo source, change the processing to stereo. Okay, it happened with me. I was like, why am I panning left and right, but I'm getting mono? It's because of that. So just double check. If you have a stereo source, set this to stereo. If it's just mono source, set it to mono. And you can listen to what you're de-essing. So if you click right here and set the monitor to on, you can actually hear the part of the signal that you're de-essing and fine tune it better. Then of course, turn it off again. So it's like a one-band compressor. You can even change the ratio of the compression, which is really good. Other de-essers don't let you do that. And that's pretty much everything I would use for a normal channel. Once you have everything the way you like it, you're gonna delete all the audio in the project. Click Ctrl X to get rid of them. And you're gonna save that as a template. So I'm gonna go to File and go to Project Templates, save project as a template, and I'll put it somewhere that I know where it is. I like to give it a version number because I'm always tweaking. After every live stream, I go back and change some things and save it as a new version. So let's hit save. Now I have a template. And here's the cool part. Go back to preferences and I go up to project. When creating new projects, use the following project file as a template. Click browse and I'm gonna find my file that I just saved. Click on it and here you go. That's the file and I'll hit apply. Okay. Now when I close Reaper, open Reaper, it will immediately load that template. You don't have to do anything. You just open Reaper and it's there. Everything is working. And you can see right here, the track that is armed is still armed. You don't even have to arm the tracks again to let audio pass through them. That's really cool. You want even something cooler? Like I'm doing, we just turn on the computer and Reaper launches on its own and it loads the template. I showed you how it loads the template. Let me show you how to make it launch. I'll close Reaper, hit the Windows key plus R and it will open that. And I'll type shell, 2 dots or colon, I think that's called in English, and then start up and I'll hit OK. It will open the folder that tells the computer what apps to launch on startup. So if I go right here and grab the shortcut of Reaper, right click, copy, right click, paste. Now, if I turn my computer off and on again, Reaper will open immediately. And because I did that template thing, it will also open the template. So literally the only thing I have to do is just turn on the computer. This is the real deal. Okay, this is the template that I'm using at my church. And I'm gonna walk you through some of the really cool stuff that I did. Because I bet some things you didn't think of. Even if you know the concept, you probably didn't think of using it in that context. But before I go to the cool things, there are less cool things that you need to know, and that is plugin latency. Most of what I'm using here, whether it's EQ or compression or de-essing, they are all zero latency plugins and they are all native to Reaper. So how do I know how much latency a plugin has? I will click on the effects button on the track where it says FX. Right here, if you click on a plugin, you can see how much latency it has. It says 0/0, which means 0 samples on the input and 0 samples on the output. It's not delaying the audio at all. Same thing goes for the compressor. Remember, I told you don't use the pre-comp slider because raise that slider. You can see now it's delaying the sound by 333 samples. If I raise it more, it's more samples. And so if the delay from that plugin is bigger than the buffer size, it will take 2 buffers because the output buffer is a set number. So if you look in here, it's either 2048 or 1024 or 512 or 256. If that input buffer is bigger than the buffer that you set, the output buffer will be the next bigger one. And that is important because if you want to use plugins that do have latency, you're gonna have to compensate for that latency. Reaper does not do automatic latency compensation on live inputs. No other DAW does that. And your mixer doesn't do it either. If you put an insert on a channel on your mixer, it does delay the channel. Now, some plugins like a limiter will have latency. It has 480 samples of latency. Now, if you're using that on the master mix, it doesn't matter. You're delaying the whole thing together. But if you're using it on a certain channel or a group, you have to keep in mind that it's delaying the sound by 10 milliseconds. Now, how do you manually do delay compensation? With a recorded audio file, you can just grab the file and move it backwards. But with live inputs, you cannot do that. It's happening in real time. You can't go back in time. So if there's something that is delayed, the fix would be to delay everything else to match up with it. You're using a plugin that has some latency, you're gonna calculate how much latency it has. So how do you know how much time is 57 samples? First of all, you need to know your sample rate. Most probably you'll be running at 48 kilohertz. I'll type in 57 and I will divide it by 48, okay? Because 48,000 hertz. And this is the number of milliseconds. So 57 samples is 1.18 milliseconds. And it is actually important to align your sources because if you have multiple microphones that are capturing the same instrument and they are out of time, they will start causing issues. Crowd microphones, for example, if they are not in time, it sounds worse than not using them at all. Although you probably heard live streams without crowd microphones and it sounds really awkward. I don't know another way to describe it other than awkward. Once you know how much time your worst plugin is doing, you're gonna delay everything else by that amount of time. And if other plugins have a different latency, you're gonna remove that from them. First of all, I will put a delay plugin on all the tracks. If I click an empty spot, I can type in delay and That is the plugin. Turn up the wet signal to 0 and turn down the dry signal all the way. And also I'm gonna turn down the length musical, this one. I'm gonna turn it down all the way. We don't want that. So now I can use this plugin just as a simple delay. If you're using the M32 and go to the channel configuration, you will have an input delay right here. You can turn it on and start turning it up. For example, if you have a kick in and kick out microphone for the drums, you can delay the inside microphone to match up with the outside microphone, stuff like that. So that plugin right now is basically acting like that input delay. And so how much did we say we need on that limiter? We need 480 samples, which is 10 milliseconds. So I will grab that plugin and I will set 10 milliseconds. I will type it in 10 and then I will copy that plugin to every other track. Copying a plugin is as simple as just clicking and dragging to the next track, and that copies it. Now, just something that makes sense, I will put the delay plugin on top. So the first plugin in the chain is the delay. And now if everything has delay, I can go to the track that doesn't need the delay and turn it down. Or I can remove the plugin, it's the same thing. The delay plugin doesn't have any latency. There's 0 latency. This output latency of 1024 is caused by the limiter. So if I turn off the limiter, it goes away. Have it in the signal chain and turn down the delay to 0 milliseconds, or remove it completely, that's fine. And let's say you have another plugin and it has a different amount of delay. So this example, it has 39 samples, 39 divided by 48, and it's 0.81 milliseconds. Since that delay plugin is already on every track, I can go back to the delay and subtract that from the biggest amount of delay. So if the plugin that's causing me the most latency is delaying the audio by 15 milliseconds, 15 minus 0.81 and I'll get 14.19. So I'll type in here 14.19 and this will make sure that this track that has less latency is still in time with the other one. I hope that's making sense. So figure out what plugin will cause you the most latency, know how much time is that, and put a delay on everything else. And then among that everything else, if there are certain tracks that do have latency but not that much, you can split the difference. Take the biggest delay time minus the delay time of that track and you'll know how much to input on the delay plugin for that track. This way you can have everything in time. Or if you don't want a headache, just use 0 latency plugins and you're good to go. Also, if you look at my template, you will see that I have 15 milliseconds on pretty much everything except the crowd microphones. And that's because crowd microphones are in the room. There is some distance from the stage to where the microphones are, and therefore the sound from the microphones will be delayed to arrive later in time than the sound coming from stage. And so if I turn up the crowd microphones in the mix just as they are, they make this mix sound muddy and kind of really loose. So the way to align them, I'm gonna arm all the tracks for recording and I'm gonna record them, and then I'm gonna go in front of the main microphone and clap. Make sure it's a clear clap. Stop recording, and I'm gonna compare the sound from the main microphone coming from stage to the sound from the crowd microphones. And I'm gonna measure how much delay exists. You can see a very sharp transient. You're gonna measure from that, from the beginning. You can use this here, the plus icon, to zoom in, and I'm gonna see where it starts and then measure from here. And the milliseconds is the last number on the right. Okay, so first you have minutes and then seconds and then milliseconds. So I can measure the time. I found out that at my church, it's 15 milliseconds, the difference between the transient on the main microphone and the transient on the crowd microphone. So I put a 15 millisecond delay on everything except the crowd microphones. And when you align your crowd microphones with everything else, or should I say you align everything else with your crowd mics, because your crowd mics are time 0. Anyway, when you do that alignment, everything will sound amazing. You can keep your crowd microphones loud in your mix, and the worst thing that's gonna happen is you're gonna hear someone coughing or talking to someone else, but it will not clutter the mix. Ambience is really important. It's what makes or breaks the mix. Try listening to a live stream that doesn't have ambient mics or crowd mics. Even if the mix itself is really good, it still sounds awkward because what you see on screen is not what you're hearing. It's not a studio recording, it's a live recording, and there are people singing. You should hear the sound of the people. So make sure everything is aligned properly. And now I can show you the really cool thing that I did. I'm basically controlling Reaper with the mixer. It's not through any MIDI or any control software. It's through audio. And that's really cool. Look what I'm doing. You see here, there's pink noise. I'm generating pink noise on the track, and same thing over here. I'm using that pink noise with a gate in order to simulate a mute button. During worship, I want my crowd microphones and I want my reverb from Reaper. Oh, and let me show you the reverb that I'm using. I'm using the Valhalla Supermassive. This reverb is free, by the way, and it sounds amazing. Okay, so just go download it and use it. To be honest, it sounds a lot better than a lot of the reverbs that cost money. That's my opinion though, you don't have to take it. But that's the only plugin that does not come with Reaper. And before the reverb, I'm doing some EQ to cut some low lows and some high highs just to not overwhelm the reverb and keep it a bit contained. So it's just giving some life, but it's not distracting. And after that comes the really cool part. You see a gate right here. I'm using that gate as a mute button. And I'm doing that in order to control Reaper from the mixer. It's not through MIDI, not through any control software. It's strictly through audio. And that's really cool. Look what I'm doing. First of all, I set the threshold of the gate to -90. Not all the way to -infinity because it doesn't work as intended if you turn it all the way. So just set it to a very low number. I think -90, -80 is good. It works for that purpose. And then in the detector input, you're gonna set it to auxiliary. So it's not looking at the main input, which is the actual reverb. It's looking to a different input. Based on that, it will either open or close. If there is signal on that other channel, the gate will open and we will hear the reverb. If there's no signal on that other channel, the gate will close and we will not hear any reverb. It's muting the reverb. Okay, that's cool in concept, but what other signal can I give it? Should I give it, for example, the crowd microphones as a signal, and then when I mute the crowd from the mixer, it will stop sending the reverb to the live stream? That's kind of weird because maybe I don't want to mute the crowd microphones because the crowd mics are also going to the in-ear monitors for the musicians. I can generate some noise, pink noise generator. You have it in Reaper. We're generating pink noise at -40 dB. The reason I'm turning it down is because even if it accidentally goes in the stream or somewhere else, it's not gonna blow anyone's ears away. So I made a track and I'm generating noise on that track. And by the way, I'm setting the input to none just to make sure that the only audio on that track is the pink noise that I'm generating. I'm sending that noise to an empty channel on the mixer, and I'll show you which channel. I'm not wasting any channels. Then I'm getting it back from the mixer to Reaper on a track. I'm receiving it on that track and then sending it to the gate. The concept is I can click a mute button on the mixer and it will mute the reverb in Reaper. Same thing goes for the crowd microphone. Click Alt-R, the outputs will show up here. I just set that noise track to be output 18. So I will receive it on USB 18 on the mixer. Here you have your 4 effects channels. These are the effects returns. So if you're using reverb, delay, whatever, they go to the bus and then they return on these channels to come to the main mix. I'm only using reverb and I'm not using the others. I'm using effects for other things, but I'm not using them as time-based effects. They don't need send and return. Last channel right here that is not being used by anything. Turn down the fader all the way. Go to the main tab and remove it from the main stereo. If you look here, the reverb is on the main stereo, which is the main mix for the room, but I don't want that to go to the speaker. So I'm going to click on it, go to the main tab and turn off main stereo button. Go to the input of that channel and set it to USB 1718. These channels are stereo channels, so you cannot set it to just one input. That's why it has to be 1718. Now I'm getting that noise from Reaper going into the mixer and I will see it on that channel, but I need to send it back out of the mixer to Reaper. So I'm going to go to the in-out and go to the USB send. I'm going to say that USB 18, which will be input 18 in Reaper, will have effects for right. When you see effect like this is the effect bus. When you see FX like this, these are the effects channels, these 4. It's effects 4 and it has left, right. I'm using 18, so it's the right side of it. You can see 1718. So I'm gonna send effects for right out of USB 18. And now in Reaper, I'm gonna receive it on input number 18. You can see it right here. I have input number 18. And this track needs to be armed. The record button on the track needs to be on in order to let the audio pass through. So you can either create a send or you can just grab the routing button for that track that is receiving audio back from the mixer. Remember, we're sending to the mixer and getting back from the mixer. That track that is getting the audio back from the mixer, I'm gonna click on the routing button, grab it and drag it all the way to the gate and release it. That's how I tell the gate that this is the input you should listen to in order to know if you should open or close. And of course, it should be on auxiliary input. If it's on main input, it will just look at the signal from the channel itself. You get what I'm doing? I'm generating noise on a track. It doesn't have any input. It goes out of USB 18, goes into the mixer to the effects return channel that has the input 18, send it out of the mixer. And by the way, the tap point should be set to input plus mute. And this is really important because analog means only things that are physically plugged in with either XLR cable or TRS cable. But this is a USB input. It doesn't have an analog component. It's coming from the computer. So we need to set it to input. And why we need plus mute? Because when I mute this channel on the mixer, I hit the mute button, I will not receive any audio anymore in Reaper. Nothing will go to the gate and therefore the gate will remain closed. It will not open and I will not have the reverb sound. The reverb will get muted in Reaper. You might know how sidechaining works, but I don't think you thought about using this kind of method. And if you did, please tell me in the comments. I think this is really cool. So I did the same thing for the crowd microphones. I made a track, generated pink noise on it, sent it out of output number 17 and received it on this channel, effects 3, and also has input 17, 18. So now since I'm getting on 17, I will receive it on the left channel. In out USB sends, I will set USB 17 to effects 3 left. If I wanted to, I could just do them on the same track and have the same trigger mute and unmute both the crowd and the reverb together. But I just wanted them to be separate to have independence. And this is also set to input plus mute. So when I mute this channel on the mixer, signal will stop coming to Reaper and therefore the gate on here will stop receiving audio. It will remain closed and I will have no crowd microphones in the live stream mix. That's really cool. Good job. Good job. We're not done yet. We learned how to do delay compensation and how to control the mix of Reaper through the mixer, but we still need to send the audio, the full mix, to OBS for streaming. Reaper, natively, it has a plugin. It's called Reastream. I'll put it on the main mix. This is the master mix. Click here, type in Reastream. It can either receive audio or send audio. We don't want to receive anything to Reaper. We want to send it from Reaper somewhere else. So I'm gonna click on send audio. I'm gonna select broadcast, type in the IP address of the computer that is running OBS. Now, how do you know what is the IP address of the computer that you're sending audio to? First of all, it has to be connected to the network. If it's connected to a different network, it will give you a different IP address. So make sure it's on the network that you're using. Then you're gonna hit the Windows key and type CMD to open the command prompt, and you're gonna type in IP config like this all together and hit enter. And right here you'll have your IP address. This is the number that you want to get. Make sure you're looking under Ethernet, not under wireless, because wireless will have a different number and we're not sending audio wirelessly. We're using the wired network. So look under Ethernet and type in this number into the Reastream plugin. That's the IP address of the other computer. Whatever is on the master mix is going to that IP address. Very important. You can send audio wirelessly over the network. First of all, both computers have to be connected to the same network, obviously. Well, maybe not obviously, but they should be connected to the same network. And even though you can send audio wirelessly, I do not advise you to do so because you'll have a lot of dropouts. It's a very unpleasant experience. So just get an Ethernet cable. If you're far away, if your computers are not next to each other, you'll have to buy a longer cable. Plug it into your computer that is mixing the live stream and plug it to a router or a network switch and plug the other computer that is running OBS into the same switch or same router. So these two computers are on the same network with a wired connection. And the wired connection is really good, really stable. We sent the audio out of this computer, but we need to receive it on the other computer. How will we do that? We need to download this plugin as an independent VST plugin. I'll type pre-plugs and I'll click on the first link and here are the downloads. I will download for the 64-bit system and install it normally. When you open OBS, you're gonna click on the plus right here and do a audio input capture. Okay. And you're gonna set the device to something that you're not using. Let's set it to voice meter output. Then hit OK. I'll rename this, call it Reaper Audio. And now I'm gonna click on the 3 dots on that Reaper audio right here. Click on the 3 dots, go to filters, click the plus and do VST2. Hit OK. And then I'm going to select a plugin. I have all these plugins on my computer. I'm going to select Reastream standalone, open the plugin interface and set it to receive. You can see right here, I have audio. Now I muted it because I'm talking into this microphone and this is the same microphone that is going to Reaper and being recorded. I don't want my voice twice in this screen recording. That's why I muted it, but we have audio. And if you don't have anything to use as the device, you can download the voice meter banana. Go here and type in voice meter banana. Click on it and just download. So you're just using it as a dummy input, because if you don't have a device selected, this will not work. In OBS, select a device that you're not using, and then you're gonna put that filter on it and decide that it's a VST plugin and choose the Reastream standalone and set it to receive, and you're gonna receive audio. There's an identifier. So if you want to use multiple of these, you can, but you have to change the identifier. So this is called default. If I change this to Dan, I'm not receiving audio anymore. Okay, if I go to Reaper right now and I change this to Dan, you will see that I am receiving audio. The identifier should be the same. The identifier is the name or whatever characters you type in to tell it that this plugin is talking to this plugin. I recently faced a problem that you may or may not face. Normally, if you connect stuff to the LAN ports on a router, it will assign IP addresses to the devices that are connected to it. But a normal network switch does not do that. So in my situation, everything is connected to the network switch that is close to the computer, and that switch is connected to the 4G router that is somewhere else. When the router is on, it will assign the IP addresses to anything that doesn't have a static IP. The problem is when the router is off. I wasn't getting audio anymore to OBS. The laptop is taking a very weird IP address. It starts with 169.256, something like that. It's unusual. Anyway, the solution to that is quite simple actually. Just add another Reastream plugin with that different IP. So let's say that's the IP with the router on. I'll add another Reastream plugin and I'll put that other weird IP 169.256.something, I don't know. So now I'm streaming to both IPs at the same time. Therefore, regardless on which IP the other computer is, I'll still be sending audio to it and it will still receive it. If your network setup is very simple and you're just using a normal router and plugging straight into it, you don't have to worry about that. But we're not done. This video is getting really long. We still need to control Reaper remotely. Go to the preferences again, go all the way down till you find control/OSC/web. Click on it and you're gonna add, and in here you're gonna choose web browser interface. In here you're gonna set it to fancier, and then you're gonna copy this IP address, paste it into your browser of your phone or tablet or another computer that is connected to the same network. It doesn't have to be wired. You can connect wirelessly. It works fine. And if you want to have multiple instances of these control pages, you will change the port on the next one. So if you want one to control monitor mixes, you will change the port to 81, for example, to have multiple pages, because if the port is the same, you will not have multiple pages. And I will copy this, apply settings, okay, and I'll go to my browser and I will paste it right here. From here, I can arm or disarm tracks, I can mute them, I can solo them, and if I click on it, it will open the fader and the send if it has a send. You can mute the send also. You can change the level of the fader, you can change the level of the send for each track. If you have tracks that are armed, you can hit record right here and it will record in Reaper. Hit stop right here, it will stop. And if you're recording and you don't want the recording files, you made a mistake, you didn't mean to record, you can abort the recording. It will delete what you just recorded. So hit OK, stop, pause, loop. You can go forward and backward in the session. You can go to the end of the session, to the beginning of the session. You can click here and undo and redo. Now on your phone, it will look something like this. By the way, you need internet to do this. So the computer that is using Reaper needs to have internet in order to be able to control it remotely. It doesn't have to be the same network that you're streaming to. Because you're streaming through a wire, you can also connect your computer to another wireless network. So if you're connected wirelessly to a different network, make sure that your phone or tablet tablet is connected to that other network for control. Or it can be the same network if you don't mind. Doesn't matter. And of course, when you're done, you can save it as a new file. I would rather do that, save it as a new version. So project template, save template, and then save it as Livestream template version 1.8, save. And then I'll go here into project and change it right here. So I will choose that one and hit apply. So now when I open Reaper, it will load the latest template. That's it. That's how you take all your tracks from your mixer into Reaper, mix them in here and align everything, do delay compensation manually and send it through the network to OBS on the other computer and control Reaper remotely and also mute the reverb and crowd microphones with audio through the mixer. If you're still watching till now and you haven't hit the like button yet, do so. What are you waiting for? And also I'll give you my template so you can use it as a starting point instead of doing everything from scratch.
I screen recorded these two examples from Facebook, and just keep in mind that Facebook doesn't have the best reputation for good audio quality. Just saying.
I have two crowd microphones and I pan them left and right. I'm compressing each one individually, sending it to a group, cutting a lot of low end. Of course, I'm de-essing it. I'm using a clipper. Why? Because the limiter has latency and I don't want to deal with latency. And also the clipper kind of sounds cool. It's not full on distortion, but it's also not as clean as the limiter. The limiter is really clean. It sounds kind of dull. I need some character. The thing with crowd microphones is that you have to compress them a lot in order to give you the sound that you're looking for, because they are for ambient. Think of it as room mics for drums. When you record drums in a studio, you have your close microphones and then you have room microphones and you squash them in order to bring up the energy. And that gate at the end is for muting and unmuting the crowd in Reaper from the mixer. Then I have some 58 microphones. This EQ is just a standard cut low end, boost some high end, and these specific frequencies I found that they were really annoying in that room. In a different room you will have different annoying frequencies. And then I'm compressing it quite a bit because a lot of the people that use these microphones in church don't really have a concept of talk into the microphone and keep a consistent voice and keep a consistent distance. They're like that and like that and loud and quiet. So I need to compress it to compensate for that. And of course I'm de-essing. If you're not using de-essers on anything, use it on vocals. And I'm doing the same thing for all the other microphones. Then I'm combining them all into a group and I'm delaying that. Instead of delaying each microphone alone, I'm delaying the group as a whole because all these microphones are already in time. And I'm sending the group to the reverb. That's what I'm doing. You don't have to do it. You can do a send to the reverb for each one of them separately. And then on my master, nothing crazy. I'm cutting just anything below 45 Hertz because it doesn't need to exist. I'm compressing it fairly slow attack time. So I'm not killing the transients. I'll let the transient pass through and then it will compress. And really important, high pass. Everything below 100 Hertz will not be taken into consideration. If you have a lot of bass, it will trigger the compressor and it will start pumping. That's something that you don't want. And then after that, I have a clipper. You might want to use a limiter. And I think maybe in the future, I might just use limiter instead of clipper. I'll see. I'm changing things all the time. But for me, if I use a limiter and I want to get this loud, it will sound soft. What the clipper does, it literally clips the signal. But it doesn't sound bad because it's a soft clipper. That's the job of the plugin. We're not going into the red. So whatever gets above the threshold, this will just cut it off. It has a sort of sound. It has a character. It's not dull. Now, if you do too much, if you turn down the threshold too much, you will hear distortion, okay? It's a clipper at the end of the day. But if you're doing just a little bit to cut off the very high transients, it will help you a lot to make things louder without actually clipping digitally. The more you turn down the threshold, the louder it gets. And I'll have the ceiling at either -1 dB or -0.5, just enough room so that if anything slips through, I will not actually clip the output. I still have a little bit of margin for error. And finally, I have the Reastream plugin. So after everything, I'm sending the audio away. If I put the Reastream plugin first, I will not get any of the processing on the master output. So you have to put it last. And also I'm delaying the signal. So I'm syncing the audio to the video from Reaper. You can do that in OBS, but for me, I think it works better if I do it within Reaper. I'm delaying all the mix by 180 milliseconds because if I don't do that, the audio will arrive very early. You will hear the audio and then you will see something happen in the video. We don't want that. We want the video and the audio to be together, synced. So I have to delay the audio this much. That's why at the beginning of the video, I told you that no matter how big of a buffer size you have, it still doesn't matter because you're gonna delay it more to sync it with the video. Now, as a plan B or as a safety plan, I'm still sending audio from the mixer from a mix bus. I used the last effect send bus as a just post fader bus for the live stream audio. And the reason for that is just in case someone forgot to turn on the Reaper computer or for whatever reason, I don't know, the computer exploded, we still have audio on the live stream. We can go to OBS and unmute the mixer audio, and here we go, we have audio on the live stream. And we can later figure out what's happening or what was wrong without panicking and without having the live stream silent. Something really cool I did also in Mixing Station is I made a button, I called it Sermon. When I click that button, it will mute effects return 3 and effects return 4. Now I'm not connected to the mixer, but these are the channels that control the crowd microphones and the reverb in Reaper. And also the other thing it's doing is raising the send of the preacher microphone by 5 dB to that live stream bus that is on the mixer and turning down the crowd microphone. And when I turn it off, the crowd mics get back up in that live stream bus and the preacher mic gets back down to normal level. So that button is moving these faders and muting these all at the same time. If you want to learn how to do this, click on the video on the screen right now and I'll show you how to do it.